Today we're going to discuss a holiday that should be a federal holiday where we all get paid, but black people get paid like 5 times more. No, don't argue with me. Argue with your mama. Y'all know what y'all did. To my channel. It's your girl Dando Cielo, your favorite chingona chocolate. Back with another video. So if you haven't already, just go ahead and start my channel. I mean, you want to see great black content, here you go. Just subscribe, like this video, share with your friends, and subscribe. It's a fun time here, okay? Makeup, music, talking about the things that matter. It's a great time here, so you should definitely go subscribe. Or watch this video, then I'll give you the reason to subscribe, okay? Okay? Let's begin. But to understand the full story of Juneteenth, you have to go back in time, back to the 1940s, to the beginning of what's known as the Atlantic slave trade. So now, the Atlantic slave trade was not the only slave trade that happened in Africa. The Atlantic slave trade was the spark of many historians sourced the beginning of racial injustice in the world against black people.
The slave trade entails Europeans bringing in guns and different goods to Africa, in which they were given African slaves in return, and then taking them to either back to their native countries or to other parts of the world they colonized. Now, fun question, kids. Who was the first country to use African slaves? Was it the French, the Spanish, the English, or the Portuguese? Comment down below.
The Portuguese actually were the first in the 1940s to take slaves from Africa to other parts of the world. Actually, they said by the end of the 16th century that actually 10% of Lisbon, so Portugal's capital, was 10% African, which, and then the Spanish followed suit in 1509, and then the English don't get in the game until 1619, with that being the year that the first set of enslaved Africans arrived to Georgetown, Virginia in 1619. The European settlers took slaves from countries in West Africa, now present-day Ghana, Nigeria, Cameroon, and Senegal.
Before colonization, most African societies were very decentralized, meaning that most things were handled on a local manner, and they don't really report back to like a central authority, like say now in our governments now you have local authorities that report back to the governor, like that. So it was very decentralized, and there was no sense of an African identity at this point in time, just because people were just on their continent, they're part of their kingdom, part of their tribe, and that's their identity. And also there's a common argument I hear.
Well, while that is somewhat true,
Black slavery in Africa is that a lot of people were criminally indentured servants in Africa. They were prisoners of war, or they were like enslaved because of a debt or a payment for some wrongdoing. So it was more of an indentured servant system in African slavery. Now, as far as the involvement with the Europeans, it all stems from kind of like wanting to try and stay on top of like the changing time of like them offering them guns and various materials.
So we understand that. So before there was an African identity, just people were just, hey, here are these slaves I have. Here, you want them? You can have them. But yeah, then we're gonna get to a really dark part of history. Middle Passage, what the voyage was called, when they would bring enslaved Africans via boat to the New World. And these voyages usually took a minimum of 7 weeks, and these ships were packed full of people. Now, usually what they did, they would have the men in chains, and they would have them stacked on top of each other. They would normally leave women and children unchained in some ships, but they would be in like a very confined space as well. But so not, it's a little bit better than being it's a little better than being unchained, but still they have to, if they were unchained, they would either have to, you know, these chained people would be dancing in chains for, you know, people on the ship. They'd have to be doing other things, or just being in this confined space if they were unchained. And, you know, disease was very common. People got the smallpox, people got lots of diarrhea and other like malnutrition because of like there was not very well kept hygiene on these ships. So most people, so it's an estimated about 10 to 20 people died seaside on the for the voyage to the New World. Now also you keep in mind that there were mutinies. People did try to overthrow these ships. They don't talk about this in school, in high school and grade school. People did try to overthrow the ships. People did, you know, do rebellions, and people, if that didn't work, people would die by suicide and just jump off the ship. And instead of trying to survive what was waiting for them in the New World. Alright, so this phrase, we're not our ancestors, but I mean, their ancestors fought back. I mean, there was attempts to overthrow, to like escape slavery, and there are Maroons would call, what are 10 to 20% of the slaves would die seaside, whether it be by disease or by suicide. And then you would have another 15 to 30 that would die along the coast, either from illness or on the path from like walking from the coast along to wherever the settlement was, wherever they were trying to go to be enslaved or work with their plantation. People on plantations worked in the field as field hands to pick cotton and other crops that grew from the ground. And you also have people who worked as quote-unquote house slaves that took care of the master and his family. You know, there's a lot of repression. People were stripped of their native African names and given English or whatever conquistadors names. They were not allowed to read or write either, which I'm just like, that's fucked up. Like, how are you supposed to survive if you can't read or write? But then they would make fun of you for not knowing how to read or write. That was one of the very true restrictions they had. First part of slavery was that they were not allowed to learn to read or write. Very strict policing. Actually, our modern police force is derived from the policing of slaves, of reporting runaway slaves. But that's a whole other history that you don't have time to get into today. Now, a lot of people did, like, as a parting, as the slave culture was growing and growing, people did mix Christianity with some of their West African roots to create new religions. Also, at the same time, while people are being enslaved, there's still rebellion. They don't teach about this a lot in grade school, but people found various ways to rebel. People, of course, ran away. That was very common. People would find to not do the work. It's actually pretty common for women even back then to be like, hey, I'm menstruating, I'm not working today. There were slave revolts. I think probably one of the most famous one was the one with Nat Turner. These people would do things. People would actually like poison, like people who like slaves that were in charge of like cooking. They would poison. Actually, they would poison families, especially the masters of or slave masters. And also, it was very common for some mothers, especially if they were raped by the master or by someone who was white, to commit infanticide so that their child wouldn't have to face the same fate of being a slave. So don't let the history books fool you. There was a lot of rebellion done both on the ship on the way to the New World, and then also in the New World as well to combat against slavery. But again, it was because of the system as a whole.
But we know that things eventually come to a head in the U.S. when the Civil War begins in 1861. So the Civil War was fought for a lot of reasons, all of them revolving around slavery, about states' rights, about expansion, about whether to have slavery in the new states that were being added to the Union. And then also, you do have this conflict, economic conflict of industry, like industrializing versus farming. So that's causing a lot of friction within the Union as well. And I think it's so funny, the difference between like learning about the Civil War as like a kid and then like learning about the Civil War as an adult.
The North and the South fought over what was right, and the North wanted people to be free because that was the right thing to do, but the South wanted to keep wanted to keep the system of slavery going.
Yeah, most people didn't really care about Black people or about the moral implications of slavery. They really just wanted to be able to further industrialize the North.
But ironically, the slave economy that had made America so prosperous in the South was now keeping them from pushing forward into further industrialization. That's a big factor.
The log of Congress talking about the Civil War in America. Fort Sumner in the harbor of Charleston, South Carolina, continued to fly the U.S. flag even as Confederate forces surrounded it. Lincoln decided to send provisions, but no additional troops or ordnance to the fort unless resistance was met. Unwilling to tolerate U.S. garrison in Southern Territory, Confederates began shelling the fort in the pre-dawn hours of April 12, 1861, and the Union guns responded. Civil War had begun. As the spring and summer of 1861 wore on, hundreds of thousands of white men, most of them ill-trained and prepared for war, poured into the armed forces of both sides, anticipating when their services would be accepted. Anticipating a day when their services would be accepted, African American men in the North formed military training companies, while women on both sides labored on the home front after their men left for war. Most Americans assumed the war would be over by Christmas. But the bloody battle at Manassas, Virginia, and the Union naval blockade of the Confederate coastlines, just otherwise, as the conflict into 1862, the North and South readied their armies for a longer fight. So I know the Confederacy definitely had advantages of like the land. I believe they had the Missouri on their side as well. So
throughout 1862, the war is getting more violent, more bloody, and lots of lives are being lost. We do come to January of 1863, where Abraham Lincoln issues the Emancipation Proclamation, which in reality did not shit, but I mean it didn't. It declared freedom for the states in the Confederacy. Freedom for the slaves in the states of the Confederacy. The Confederacy, which Abraham Lincoln himself, as head of the Union, has no jurisdiction over, versus he could have said both the border states and the Confederacy slave, because you still had in the Union border states that had slavery, like Maryland, West Virginia, and Kentucky. So instead of actually freeing people in his jurisdiction, he frees people that are in the Confederacy. But it was honestly, if you really know history, this didn't do really much of anything. It just meant to demotivate the slaves in the Confederacy. And also, Abraham Lincoln had more of a concern of if Britain got one of the states seceding, if they were going to support the Confederacy. And that's really all I say about that one. I'm not gonna lie. Both sides really began thinking they can win. I know Ulysses Grant, who was running the Union Army, starts going into the offensive, and they are fighting all through 1864. Lots of nasty, looking at the source right now, like lots of nasty battles here, lots and lots of people dying. The end of the Civil War is marked on April 9th of 1865, when General Lee surrendered to General Grant at the Appomattox courthouse in Virginia. and that they should rejoice at the end of war. And people had to go gallop all over the states and tell the news the war is ended and the Union is victorious. And so now we soon arrive to the fateful day we've all been waiting for, because it took them maybe a couple months to get around, because they either had to go by foot or by horseback. But on June 19th of 1865, General Gordon Granger arrives to Galveston, Texas, and declares that all the slaves are free, and reads off the General Orders number 3, which designated orders freedom for the enslaved people. So some slaves were reluctant to believe this news, and could you blame them? Because after all they've been through, I would find it hard to trust white people too, like honestly. But a lot of people were instantly just jubilant and excited for the end of slavery. Although it wasn't the end of the struggle for Black liberation, people were excited, and people do commemorate this day. This day has been an official holiday, Juneteenth, in Texas since 1980. And all states actually recognize, on the state level, Juneteenth as a holiday, except for North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, and Hawaii. Which, the first I understand, but Hawaii hasn't recognized Juneteenth. Like, of anyone of all the states, y'all know, y'all should be with us. I'm just like, if you this for Hawaii. From what I know, there's no set custom for Juneteenth. I didn't know this was a day until maybe like college, actually. I don't think I learned about this till college, which is crazy. I lived in the US in Ohio my whole 27 years of life. A lot of people do festivals because it is in June. People will eat soul food, watermelon, strawberry, soda pop. Apparently those are some of the most significant foods for this day. It's a big deal in Texas for sure. And yeah, I'm excited this year because it's going to be on a Friday, so we're going to get out there. But I mean, Juneteenth 2021 is going to be Saturday, so I'm just saying, let's turn it over. Block party, something like that. Just in Ohio, you know, Juneteenth, just mark it down, But also, there is a movement to get more support for Juneteenth. There is the National Juneteenth Observance Foundation. Their goals are to make Juneteenth a federal holiday, to add the story of Juneteenth into our education for people in secondary, middle school, high school age, and also to add to the curriculum in the arts, because June is actually Black Music Month. So to have an educational course about jazz in American schools. So you can go to the National Juneteenth Observance Foundation and become a member and help support them in this mission. I think that'd be awesome. That'd be awesome to do, explain more about how so much, Black music is popular and how much we really contribute to society. Not even just jazz, but I mean, we can do a video about that actually in a few days, about Black Music History Month. But if you want to support Juneteenth, here's what you can do. You can go ahead and let all your friends and family know what happened on this wonderful day of June 19th of 1865 to free the African Americans that were enslaved, to continue this fight for racial equality with us, and then 3, support Black voices and continue to listen to us and our perspectives. And yeah, that's all I have for you today. Hopefully this gave a good context of why June is such a big deal, and I feel it's such a big day for me was an African American woman. Oh yeah, the colors too for Juneteenth are black, green, and red. So if you want to be part of that, you can wear those colors too. And that's all I have to say for today. So thank you so much for watching, and you have a great day, and we shall overcome. Happy Juneteenth, y'all. Remember, Black Lives Matter, and be proud to express your blackness in any way that feels comfortable to you and real to you. Love ya.